Well, tomorrow is the deadline for Congress to strike a deal to keep the Department of Homeland Security funded. A temporary funding bill looks destined to expire unless a deal is reached to reform the department's immigration enforcement operations. Now, while Democrats call for stricter oversight and a ban on things like agents wearing masks, a growing number are calling for ICE to be abolished altogether. Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley, representing Chicago's North Side, joining me live now. Good morning, Congressman. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Glad to be back.
Now, you are now calling for ICE to be, quote, dismantled. In your view, what does that mean, and does it look different than abolishing ICE?
Look, there are important functions that the federal government carries out, typically done by ICE right now. One is border security, one's to make sure that there isn't human trafficking, drug trafficking, and those are important functions. But at this point in time, I have so little trust in ICE and the culture that this president has put in place. It's time to dismantle that agency and start afresh. One that appreciates that immigration reform should have been passed and implemented, but not to go about it in the way that's happening now. I mean, the horrific killings that we've heard about, I think sometimes people forget that 2 of those shootings occurred in Chicago and 1 person was killed.
I have to ask about this temporary funding bill. I know there's a deadline now looming. Do you think that there will be a deal and the Department of Homeland Security will remain funded, or what's going to happen in the next 24 to 36 hours?
Yeah, look, I voted against additional funding for ICE this week, but that bill is now in the Senate. But what I'm hearing is that the Democrats in the Senate will not support it, and there will be a government shutdown as it relates to the Department of Homeland Security. Bottom line, there are 12 bills that fund the federal government. 11 of them have passed. The Department of Homeland Security is the only one that hasn't passed. Besides ICE, there are other critical functions in that bill, including TSA, including FEMA, including the Coast Guard. Those are all critical government functions. We are willing to support measures that fund all those other aspects that DHS does, but ICE and not funding ICE until the reforms are put in place.
We'll have to see what happens there. Certainly something to keep an eye on. You know, regarding ICE and calls to abolish and calls to dismantle like your own, there is some growing criticism of the Democratic Party's seemingly disorganized response to this and other issues. Many voices and opinions, but some say a lack of cohesive strategy. So who is in charge? Is it Leader Jeffries? Is it Schumer, the party, DNC itself?
Look, the Democrats have always been a big tent. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of ideas out there, but I do believe they're unified here. I think you've seen it in the House. There was unanimous support for ICE and the changes that are necessary there. So don't ever expect total uniformity and cohesiveness within the Democratic Party. But among the broad issues, I do see an extraordinary unity right now. But look, I think there are a tremendous number of Republicans that say that ICE already has far more funding than it needs. Its budget was tripled. And there are also Republicans calling for the reforms we are. What I want the public to know is we're not asking ICE to have any reforms that aren't part of every police force in this country, requiring ID, no mask, body cameras, no racial profiling, the list goes on. But we're not asking them to do anything that we don't ask of law enforcement across the country.
So, Congressman, just to kind of touch back, polling does show, though, constituents are frustrated about the lack of a concrete plan of opposition. So I know you say there's differing opinions. Do you agree with that criticism, and what needs to change?
Look, I think if there's a closer look at what's taking place in Congress right now, this is the time where I've seen the most unity when it involves immigration and it involves what should be done with ICE. So as we get to this point, it's always been an interesting mix of interplay within the Democratic Party. But at this point in time, my message to the public is there's extraordinary unity there. And I think the calls for reform that we're talking about are even bleeding over into the moderate Republican side. The American people want change. They do want comprehensive immigration reform, but they recognize what's taking place here is horrific. it is something of a reign of terror on the American people. And we've seen it first place in Chicago itself.
Congressman, I'd be remiss, and you have to give me a quick answer here, but you've stated, of course, you're going to run for mayor of the city of Chicago in part because there's a leadership crisis. Is that still the case? And what would you say to critics who may feel you shouldn't run for one office, which you are, you're running for re-election in Congress, unopposed no less, while planning to then run for another?
Look, the way these things bleed into themselves, there's not much you can do. I see a city in crisis, and I want to act. In the meantime, I'm proud to serve here in Congress because there's a lot to do.
All right, Congressman Mike Quigley, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime.